Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to do a video to talk about my initial impressions of the full release of Battalion 1944, as this is a game that I have been following for several years, and I've been a part of the community for a long while as well, and so I wanted to give just my thoughts on the game and its future. Now, for those of you out there in the Battalion community who will be watching this video who have no idea who I am, you know, I obviously have been a big part of the Counter-Strike community for many, many years, even before CSGO, back in the Counter-Strike source days way back, but I've been a part of the CSGO community ever since the game kind of came out with the beta in 2012, and, you know, I've worked for different companies like ESEA, and then later on CEVO in the early years of the game, and with CEVO's partnered pro leagues with MLG and Gfinity, as well as many different online cups that CEVO ran with iBuyPower, CyberPower PC, etc. And then kind of in the later years, I actually got involved with Gfinity more directly with some events that they did, but also some of the bigger things I was involved with was E-League Season 1 in 2016 as a desk analyst, but then I've also worked as a desk analyst and commentator for several different companies, pretty much all of the companies that run events in CSGO I've worked with. You know, I've worked with DreamHack, I've worked with ESL, I've worked with Star Ladder, PGL, and the list goes on and on of different people I've worked with throughout my time in CS. And I've also, you know, done content creation on this YouTube channel when it comes to, you know, analytical videos about teams, players, things of that nature. And so that's really been my focus, is really working in CSGO. But on the Battalion end, maybe some of you will already know this, but some of you will not, is, you know, I backed the game on Kickstarter back in early 2016 just because I thought it was a really cool project. But pretty soon I got involved with Howard and Brammer, kind of just giving them feedback mostly on the spec mode, because they obviously wanted to have really good spectator mode for the esports side of things whenever they got to that point. And so Vince and I actually were, you know, involved in helping get some feedback in a couple of different meetings that we had with them when it came to spec mode, which for those of you in the, you know, Battalion scene that maybe were a part of COD 2 or COD 4, Vince used to go by the name Metis, and so people would probably know him maybe in the European scene going underneath that name. So yeah, we got involved early on in that, and then, you know, we stuck with it. We played all the alphas and betas, you know, was a part of the feedback process there. I also was pretty early on a pretty active member of the Battalion 1944 forums before Discord and the subreddit became kind of the main vehicles of discussion in the game. You know, I was a part of that kind of original forums they had on their website. And you know, through various feedback, I've, I guess, had some impact on the game outside of the spectator mode. You know, for instance, like Derailed, there's that tunnel from Allied spawn into the courtyard, and if you look in there, there's like little posters, and my name, Dust, Hero, and Lex's names are in there because that was kind of an idea that we came up with to kind of help allies out a bit, because normally they would just get spam nated and be cut off from the B side of the map entirely, which still can happen quite a lot, but at least that tunnel lets you get in the courtyard, maybe take fights mid, and it kind of opens up some more options. So that's kind of like one thing I was involved with. Also, the haystack on Manor House V2 in the A-bomb site in the corner when you come out long A to your right is something that I kind of kept with, because before that was just like a bunch of open space, and it just felt like that there's something missing there. And there's been a couple of little things I've been involved with the feedback. I don't want to sit here and, you know, over romanticize my involvement in the game, but the point is I've been around Battalion for a very, very long time. I've played the game, you know, pretty much through every step of the way. And also another thing, Vince and I actually casted the first ever tournaments for the game. You know, there was several online European Cups with the plays, the Blitzkrieg battles, which I think they've kicked back off again since the 4 releases come into play. But I think Vince and I casted the first 4 or 5 of those, and I also did a couple after Vince stopped with other people and did some of the NA stuff as well. And so, yeah, definitely heavily involved, heavily interested in the game is really the point. And so I didn't mean to make this intro so long, but I just kind of want to let the Battalion community know, and even the CS side, people who are watching this from the CS community, kind of my involvement in CS, my involvement in Battalion, and really, you know, I've always wanted Battalion to succeed, and just like everyone else who was a big part of the scene, it was really, you know, hurtful to see how the early access just, you know, had such a rocky start, and how it really didn't, you know, go as well as we had all hoped it would, and it certainly kind of stagnated the growth of the game for quite some time. You know, the player count dwindled. You know, I remember like the first online tournament we casted, we had like over, you know, 2,500 viewers on it, and then it just slowly decreased until there's only a couple hundred people watching, and then the player base also significantly shrunk from its peak of like, I think it was like 16,000 players when it first released early access, and all the big streamers were a part of it, and then it just kind of declined because of all the different issues it had, mostly with just kind of the matchmaking service and things like that like I guess the Google Cloud servers and whatnot. I don't know all the technicality of actually what happened there, but the point is things were really, really rough on the initial early access. Then even the second patch they rolled out several days later also had some downtime issues as well. So it was just kind of a perfect storm that really hurt the game's rep to many people in the community, and the player count really suffered because of it. And things really died down. I mean, obviously there was still some of the online cups going on for like the core audience, and we had the event. I think it was like an I series. There was an event at Philadelphia. There was of course the major that both those tournaments kind of qualified into. And they definitely had some stuff going. But after that major, things really died off. People kind of moved on. A lot of people from Battalion actually kind of went and played different Battle Royale games like Apex Legends and different things like that. And really everyone was just kind of waiting for full release, right? I mean, people would still do like beta tests and stuff like that, different things coming out. But a lot of it died down. I was trying to do content for the game. Like I did several different interviews, I think with Fantasy and Brammer. And I even had a podcast I was doing called In the Trenches, where I would usually have like a pro European player and a pro NA player. So Davies from I think it was Asias, Albana Cats in a Snowstorm, and then later on they became Method. He was on some. I think Rebirth was on one as well. And then I had Lex from the NA side, who was a part of some of the most successful, North American teams in Early Access Battalion. So we had some content going, but then that kind of, petered off as well as the game kind of faded, and everyone was just waiting. There was still, I think right before full release, like the couple of months leading up to full release, there was still some tin mans going on in like different discords for EU and NA, and I played in some of that, but a lot of it was pretty hands off for me for a while, just kind of waiting for full release. Now full release is here, and man, it's been so cool to see this game in full release and how well it's really gone. I don't think it really could have gone much better than how it's gone thus far in full release. There's been a couple of moments of downtime here and there. I know Arcade wasn't there on day one of full release really well, but it was quickly pretty much on board, and the competitive has been working pretty well pretty much all the way through. Again, a couple of spots of downtime, but very little, flowing pretty well. A lot of top streamers are streaming the game and enjoying it, like Shroud's probably the most notable one doing it, but Skadoodle, several others have also played some as well. I think Dr. Disrespect actually played a day as well. So it's been cool to see some influencers and stuff kind of pick it up and enjoy it. And it's been good that the community has really enjoyed it. I mean, I think it's grown substantially in just the first week or two that it's been out. I think the last I heard, the peak was like a little over 5,000 concurrent players, but by the time I released this video, it may have, surpassed that and start approaching more and more towards like the 7,000, eventually 10,000 range of concurrent players. So it's been really neat to just see all that. And yeah, just as far as initial impressions go, the actual title of this video is I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I think that the movement has come such a long way since alpha, as well as just how weapons work, how they look, how the graphics of the game look. I think that the fact that they have an unlimited sprint now was like one of the best changes they could have made. It obviously changed up the timings on certain maps and things like that. People have to kind of relearn those things, but I think it just feels less sticky, more free-flowing, smoother. It's just a better overall experience from, the early access and betas and things like that I played in the past. So I think the movement is in a really, really good place right now. Certainly there could be little small tweaks and things like that. Maybe some people think it's too easy to do certain jumps that were harder before, and it's not as high of a skill ceiling on movement. I think there's still some movement that is very high skill ceiling, certain straight jumps and certain things you can get on top of or get to quickly. I mean, you might still be able to do it, but if you're really good, you can do it faster, which increases your timing, which can catch people more off guard. So I think the movement's in a really good place right now. I think the gunplay is in a really good place right now as well, especially with some of the changes to the SMGs at range has been a good change. I think some people are still complaining about the scopes, the snipers being a little bit too powerful. I think the price increase has certainly helped with that. I think people are talking about maybe having a limit on how many scopes there can be on a team at once. Some people were saying as much as just capping it at 1 scope per team. I think a compromise could maybe be 2 scopes per team as a cap, but at the same time, maybe only in a competition setting as far as like the competitive matchmaking. I don't know if you'd ever want to limit that because people are trying to use all the guns and have a good time. Maybe if there was like a casual Wartide mode where there was no cats, but the competitive Wartide mode did have cats, maybe that's something you can think about in the future. But yeah, I guess personally, I've never really felt like I've gotten robbed by scopes too much or anything like that. I feel like typically if you use the right teamwork, the right utility, if you know the map, if you know the timings and the angles, you can definitely still find ways to be successful against scopes, especially if they miss. You can close the distance on them and really fuck them up. So I personally haven't felt that as much as maybe other players have, and so I can't speak to it as much, but that's probably one of the only really big complaints I've heard about weapons, to be 100% honest. I know some of the eco guns, like the default guns you start out with, are obviously really rough to use, but that's kind of the point. Like, they're free. They're not supposed to be very good. Yeah, so I think all in all, it's been pretty good. There was even one point where I thought maybe you should just get rid of the economy system altogether and just have like classes and class limits and things like that. Kind of go back to like what Pro Mod was for COD 4. But more and more as I've played it and as the economy system has evolved and how the coin values and things like that and how you get coins, I actually haven't had too much of an issue with it. I think it's actually quite fun. It certainly adds another element to the game to make it a little bit more strategical, a little bit more to talk about from a broadcasting perspective. Though I do think it's really neat to have specialists, like people who you know is like the best scope in the world, or the best Car 98 in the world unscoped, or one of the best SMG players in the world. I think it's kind of cool to have those set roles, but you can still have those, right? Like just like in CS, it's economy based, but you still have operas, entry fraggers, things like that. So I think you can still have those storylines even with an economy system, though I think they'd be a little bit more hard set if it was set classes and class limits. But that's something to think about way in the future. And I think, again, the economy system has got to a pretty good point. The thing is, it's so easy to make adjustments now. Like, just based on data and playtime, you can make tweaks to how much things cost over time based on, just how the game's evolving competitively, naturally, right? So I think that that's actually totally fine. Same with, like, movement values or maybe damage values on weapons. Those are all things that can be tweaked over time as we need to tweak them. I know the shotgun still has its issues where at range it can still be like a little bit too ridiculous, so that's like another one I think a lot of people have talked about. But again, those are things that can be tweaked over time. Like the core of the game is what's most important. The foundation itself is really stable. All the other things can be tweaked, adjusted through patches over time as need be, as we give feedback, as we figure things out as the game evolves. So I think the foundation itself is great as far as movement goes. I think a lot of the maps are quite good. I'll talk probably more about maps in like specific videos where I take a map and I give feedback on it. It's probably a video series I'll do on the channel going forward. But the original 4 maps, the ones that have played the most, this is obviously Coastal, Derailed, Manor V2, and Liberation. I think all those maps are quite good. I think Derailed still has its issues because of the nade spam at mid and how certain things can feel a bit claustrophobic on the map, but I think overall it's still fine. And I think like Lib, Manor, and Coastal are really great maps. I quite enjoy them a lot, and I think most people do. Vanguard is great as well. I think I just have some issues with the fact that you can't get to A without crossing mid, and just becomes like a really weird war at middle. Obviously, smokes and utility and other things like that can really help that out, and it also sets up for nice scope battles at middle, so I kind of like that. So there's a little bit of give and take on Vanguard on the A side of the map. On B side, I just feel like there's some weird buildings that just don't need to be there. Like the main route to be by statue and the doors and things like that, and the alleys on the side and the back of the bomb site are totally fine. But some of those like weird apartment buildings on the far side, kind of on the B side of the map, to me, I don't get why they're there. It seems a little odd. So there's probably some tweaks that can be made to Vanguard to make it really good. But I think it's in a good place. It's also cool to see the Russian faction involved on the Russian weapons. I kind of wish there was more maps that had the Russian faction. Right now, there's only one wartime map out of the 8. I think there's 8 right now, if I'm not mistaken, that has the Russian faction involved. So I really feel like we need more within the 8. Like, I don't know how you would do it thematically, what would make sense. I feel like Derailed's probably not too bad of a map to maybe switch to Russian faction, just to, again, have some variety. But, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm sure future maps will include the Russian faction, but even now, I think you could take a map like maybe Manor, even, and Derailed, thematically probably still could fit the Russians in and not feel too out of place. So maybe some tweaks there can be made to just get them more involved, because it was a great addition to the game. Obviously, people are waiting for the Brits to be added to the game as well. I'm sure it will be at some point. But overall, good stuff. I do think some of the maps are a little bit off. Like, I personally do not like Docks or Savoia, even still. I personally don't like Invasion very much either, though some people are just fine with it, and that's going to come down to personal preference. And again, tweaks can be made to maps. And again, I'll probably make specific videos on each map. But I think at the very least, at least we have enough maps with the banning phase that you have in competitive to where you have reasonable maps to play. The problem is I feel like most times it just gets banned down to the 4 core maps. Like, I don't think I've ever played a game of Docks or Savoia in competitive, and I think I've only played Vanguard a couple of times, and I think I've only played Invasion a couple of times. It's pretty much always like the core 4 of Coastal, Derailed, Matter V2, and Liberation. So a little bit of stuff there that's going to have to be tweaked around probably, but overall, at least there's enough, and at least there's enough good maps that you're more than likely going to get one when you play, and so that's totally fine. I can't wait to see what nades and stuff people come up with, and how the metas of these maps evolve over time as well. I can't wait to see how the esports house evolves over time. I do wonder a little bit if it's a bit of a conflict of interest for Faceit being in the game as the matchmaking provider, just because they are a tournament organizer as well. And so what happens when like a rival company to them wants to run an event for Battalion and Face It's the one in the game, right? I do wonder a little bit about that, if that's going to cause problems or not. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be totally fine, and they have kind of things in place to make sure that's not going to impact things. But I do wonder if certain tournament organizers are going to be turned off running events for the game when they know that a competitor of theirs is being advertised in the game at all times. So it's a little bit odd, but I also do like the integration of Face It, because I think that it's a great service, and I think that the stats that it collects and the rewards you can get and all that stuff is pretty great. Also, by the way, I think the battle rank system and how often you get free cases and stuff like that is actually pretty sick, as well as the skins that you get just for leveling up actually look pretty good as well. So I think they've done a really good job kind of nailing, giving you a lot of free shit as far as like free cases and, you know, free skins as you level. Like, that's been really great. And even the cases themselves are not that expensive to buy. At least you don't have to like buy a key on top of buying the case. It's kind of like some other I guess cases that you see in other games where you just buy the case and you unlock it. And I think it's, you know, pretty reasonably priced. And I'm sure we'll get more variety in what skins you can get and what cases are available over time, which will make it great. So I think they've done pretty well with that as well. We knew that was going to be a part of the game. It's just kind of how it goes. And so, you know, that is just what it is. So all in all, I'm pretty excited for the future of this game. I think that the foundation is really, really great. Again, there can always be tweaks to maps, tweaks to weapons, tweaks to movement, tweaks to the economy. I think there can be tweaks to spectator mode to make it even better, and I would definitely love to keep in touch with the devs and maybe try to make it better, because I think there's still some things that could change to make it just better for the viewer, better for the caster, more accessible. And so that could be something that can be changed as well. But at least the foundation, the core gameplay, the movement, the style of the game itself, the way it runs, the way you can tweak video settings, the performance as far as like FPS and things like that goes. Like, all those things have really, really been well developed, and it's come a long way from its beginnings, and it's really smooth, and it seems to operate. All the systems in place for matchmaking and stuff seem to be working. Again, there's some downtime here and there, but overall great. And so that core, that foundation is pretty intact. And so again, it's just going to come down to small tweaks over time as we figure things out, as we find bugs, as the meta develops, as we make tweaks to weapons, things like that. And that's all fine, right? Because those can all be changed rather easily with some testing over time, especially if you have an active dev team who's, you know, not over patching the game, patching it too much and not allowing it to stay there long enough for proper testing to take place, but still very active in the community, getting feedback, providing, you know, transparency and doing changes over time. So it's also just been great to see the player count rise and rise each week. This game deserves, you know, to have a strong, big community that supports it, and I'm glad it's finally starting to build that up. It's been great to be a part of Battalion from the early days and to continue with it and to see its, you know, growth and hopefully positive trajectory over time, just based on what we've seen so far. Again, I will probably continue to do content on Battalion on this channel here and there as I can. Again, I'd like to maybe start doing some videos about each map and maybe some changes I'd like to see. Again, I'd like to maybe do something talking a little bit about spec mode and how we can make that better for live broadcasting. And other than that, you know, maybe I'll try to bring that In Trenches podcast back and try to do some episodes here and there to just kind of talk about the game with other people. Well, we'll see. You know, something I certainly have my eyes on. Obviously, CS is where I do a lot of my work, but, you know, I'd love to maybe do some stuff with Battalion in the future. I think Vince and I would love to do some catching together in the future. And more than anything, it's just exciting to see how well the full release has gone, what the trajectory seems to look like, and I'm just excited for the future of the game. Hope that it continues to develop, hope that the esports side continues to develop, hopefully this can grow, and it's just been fun. And again, I don't want to spend too long talking about every single thing around the game, but just some initial impressions, my excitement for the game, and again, look out for more content from me in the future. So thanks so much for tuning in. Catch you next time.